Hi guys, it's your faculty Ranganathan and KONDALA on our Civils Plus IS Academy. I'm back again with this new series of videos where I'll be covering the Viceroys of India all the way from 1858 to 1947. In this series of videos, we will have a straightforward chronological discussion of all the Viceroys of India, their contributions in India, and how viceroys altered the history of India, different schemes, different acts, different programs these viceroys have introduced in India. You can follow me, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow me on you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow me on Civils Plus IAS Academy, and you can also subscribe to my Telegram channel Plus Students. Okay. Now, the very first viceroy that obviously everybody comes to know is Lord Canning. Now, Viceroy Canning was a viceroy from 1858 to 1862. He had been the last governor general of the East India Company. Now, it was during Canning's period, the 1857 revolt occurred. The 1857 revolt occurred. The 1857 revolt was suppressed. All that happened during Canning's period. Now, Government of India Act 1858 was actually passed during his period. The position of Viceroy was also established as part of the Government of India Act 1858. And eventually, it was also decided the same person, which is the Governor General of India, will also be the Viceroy of India. The Governor General was to be the political functionary, Viceroy was to be the diplomatic and ceremonial functionary. So, all the diplomatic jobs, all the ceremonial jobs of the crown government in India were to be undertaken by Viceroy, whereas the Governor General was to take over all the political jobs like execution of acts, creation of laws, maintenance of law and order. Now, Lord Canning was known for issuing the Queen's Proclamation in a spectacular and special darbar called the Allahabad Darbar on November 1st, 1858, informing Queen Victoria, informing the people of India that Queen Victoria has actually taken over or taken the direct control of India. The proclamation was outlined or was clearly outlined the principles on which government of India was to be undertaken and on which India would be ruled in future, as well as the British policy towards the people of India in the British Indian territories and also the princely states where British government actually had control. So all the policies were clarified and clearly clarified in the Queen's Proclamation 1858. This was given on 1st of November 1858. Now, what are the main terms of it? Number one, all of East India Company's territories and agreements which East India Company had with the princely nations were to be upheld and honored by the Viceroy and the Crown. And former East India Company's boundaries were not to be extended anymore. So basically, East India Company was not looking for wars anymore. So it was not going to annex Indian kingdoms, not going to take over Indian territories. And also, there was to be absolutely no encroachment on British possessions in India. And the British will not intrude into other princely states or other princely territories. This aspect was also very clearly clarified. Now, another provision which was given within the act was the native princes' rights, rights of the native kings, dignity, honor of these kings was to be treated as if they were their own. And also, there was an expressed wish by the British that all Indians would be treated as British subjects because Queen Victoria intended for British subjects to enjoy wealth and social growth. And given that Queen has taken over India, India was to also aim, or at least the aim as per Queen Victoria's government was to give Indians wealth and social growth, which obviously was possible only through internal peace and good governance. This is the reason Government of India Act 1858, or the Queen's Proclamation, is also called the Act for Good Governance in India. It is called the Act for Good Governance in India. So intentions were very, very clear. Also, Queen Victoria clearly said that she is obligated for the inhabitants of India in exactly the same way how she is obligated for all other subjects of the empire. So she is responsible for the peace and well-being of all the subjects of the empire as much as of India. And admission into government services and offices was now to be done without any regard to race or faith. So at least equality aspect was established, at least on paper. And except for those who had personally participated in the murder of British subjects during the 1857 revolt, everyone else was to be given general amnesty, general guaranteed amnesty. That's why the Queen's Proclamation is commonly called the Magna Carta of People of India, because it was declared in the eloquent style, precisely in accordance with the Queen's guiding principles of justice and religious tolerance. Justice and religious tolerance were to be the main aims of Queen government in India. So technically, effectively, the East India Company government is off. It is gone. Now, the Army of East India Company was also to cease to exist. So as of 1st of September 1858, East India Company's last session was convened. The East India Company's armies were effectively ceased to exist. So they did not exist, and all of them were basically made important part of the British Army eventually, which became the British Indian Army. So basically, the insignia changed from East India Company to the British Crown. Nothing else changed. The Indian sepoys were enlisted into British Army's regular service in India. All of these were the entire proclamation of Queen Victoria was actually part of the Government of India Act 1858, which was previously passed in August 2nd, 1858. So for prelims purpose, remember, the Queen's Proclamation was given on the 1st of November 1858. However, all the provisions of the proclamation were given legal sanction 2 months prior on 2nd August 1858 as part of Government of India Act 1858, or also called the Act for Good Governance in India, with royal assent being given on 2nd of August 1858, and the act itself coming into force on 1st of November 1858. The act provided also for the liquidation of East India Company and all its assets in India. So East India Company eventually was closed down by 1862, 63, and by 1892, and everything was closed by the Crown. Now, the Queen government, the powers of East India Company's Board of Control, Court of Directors, which were previously, if you remember, these two were established as part of the Pitt's India Act, the Pitt's provisions. Those two were now gone. Instead, a separate office was created called the Secretary of State for India. Now, this Secretary of State for India was to exercise complete and total authority over the control of Indian administration, every aspect of India. And the Secretary of State for India was also a member of the British Parliament and was responsible for the British Parliament. So, first time there was some sort of responsible governance which was introduced in India. See, this was not responsible to people of India, but at least to the people of Britain, at least to the Parliament of Britain. Now, the Secretary of State of India also was to be assisted by a 15-member council. Now, more than 50% of this council must have lived in India for at least 10-year period. So at least for 10 years, they must have lived in India, served in India. Now, that was a very important proposal which was given the 15-member council along with Secretary of State for India. Stanley was the first Secretary of State for India. Now, The British members of the parliament could obviously, since it was a responsible government, Secretary of State for India was completely answerable to the British crown or British parliament. So British MPs could ask any question from the Secretary of State for India on matters relating to Indian administration. This provision previously was not there. The Governor General essentially worked in India as representative of the British government and was totally responsible for the administration of the country. Okay. Now, similarly, a new office was created called Viceroy. The problem was we are talking about the British provinces. There were also princely India, many kingdoms which were not part of the direct British crown or direct British rule, but yes, they were on par diplomacy with the crown. So they needed a diplomat, and that diplomat was the one whom we call Viceroy. Viceroy literally means deputy royalty. Vice royalty. It's a short form of vice royalty. That's why he's called viceroy. Since two persons were not really needed for these two different jobs, same person was to be governor general when doing the governmental jobs, viceroy when doing the diplomatic and representative jobs in India. Now, Government of India Act 1858, thankfully, hence resulted in a completely centralized structure of government, a total centralized government. Further, see, you have to understand that all the change which was happening was essentially a formal change. In fact, nothing really was going to change substantially. I mean, as such, in terms of the change, nothing was going to change substantially. Whatever was happening was essentially only on paper. So basically, everywhere East India Company flag was going off, and the Crown's flag or the Union Jack was just going to come. Now, that was the Queen's Proclamation, 1858. Then 1861, Indian Councils Act 1861 was also passed by Lord Canning's government. Now, this Councils Act was passed in the Parliament in 1861. The Governor General's Council was now given an extra financial member, a fifth member called the financial member, as well as addition of 6 to 12 members for the purpose of formulating laws. Basically, for legislative purposes, there was to be an extra 6 to 12 members for legislative purposes in the council. So basically, council was starting to convert into a parliamentary model. For the convenience of administration, Governor General was obviously given several new powers and authorities. Like, for example, we see the introduction of portfolio system. For the first time, Governor General could deputate certain responsibilities to members of his council. This is what eventually later came to be known as the ministerial system. Ministerial. This is what is ministerial system, the portfolio system. It also provided the governments of Bombay, Madras with absolute legislative authority. So even Bombay and Madras could create laws which were obviously best suitable within their provinces. So obviously resulting in some sort of decentralization. So what was happening is on the executive part, there was centralization. On the legislative part, there was decentralization. Two things were happening at the same time during Canning's period. Similarly, Indian Civil Service Act 1861 was passed along with the Indian Councils Act. The Civil Service Act essentially stated that any person, whether Indian or European, could be appointed to any of the offices listed under Government of India Act 1858, as long as he has lived in India for a period of 7 years. A 7-year period was given, and then if you are serving in a district, the individual had to pass a language test in the district in which he was going to work. But however, remember, there were two types, guys. They were not just direct civil service. There were two types of civil service: covenanted and non-covenanted. See, the covenant civil service or covenanted civil service, the covenant upper civil service was basically entirely British. The covenant civil service was entirely British, whereas the non-covenant was allowed for Indians. So there wasn't absolute equality or blanket equality yet. Some ordinance power was given, however, stating that Indians could not be part of most important government jobs, which are reserved for covenant civil service. Indians were requesting entry into covenant civil service, obviously, which was denied, and later only India got this successfully done in the later viceroys periods. Also, similarly, around this time, we see the creation of Indian High Courts Act. Essentially, what government did at that time is there used to be three kinds of court systems: Supreme Court, Diwani, Sadar Diwani Adalat, Sadar Nizamat Adalat. Sadar Diwani Adalat, Sadar Nizamat Adalat. There used to be three courts, which is model which Cornwallis established. All of these three were merged to create high courts. High courts at Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. So Supreme Court, Sadar Diwani Adalat, Sadar Faujdari Adalats or Nizamat Adalats were all merged together to create Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay High Courts. The High Courts were also to retain the jurisdiction of the Sadar Diwani, Faujdari, and Supreme Courts. Now, these were the previous Sadar systems of the Diwani, Faujdari Adalats were the court of systems which were created by Warren Hastings and Lord Cornwallis. All that was now structured and a single high court system was created. Each of the high court was to be constituted with one chief justice and 15 chief justice. Even in this, the chief justice and at least three of them had to be barristers. At least three regular judges, including the chief justice, had to be barristers. So, chief justice plus two people had to be barristers. Plus, 1/3 of them must have been from the covenant civil service, which is 5 members must be from covenant civil service. Of the 16, 5, 8. 8 people were to be from sort of government model. The remaining 8 could be regular judges. So, one barrister, chief justice, 2 regular barristers, 5 covenant civil service. That makes 8 people. So, of the 16, 8 were to be from sort of government supported, 8 were to be regular judges. And the High Court Judicature of Fort Williams was established on July 1st, 1862 with Sir Barnes Peacock as its first Chief Justice. And similarly, Shambhunath Pandit in 1863 became the first Indian in this courts of Calcutta. Shambhunath Pandit became first Indian in Calcutta High Court judge, became a Calcutta judge, High Court judge, one of the 1 plus 15. Bombay High Court was eventually created on August 14th, 1862, and Madras High Court on June 26th, 1862. Just like this, by 1866, even a High Court was established in Agra, which later was moved to Allahabad. In 1866, March 17th, the High Court of Judicature for Northwestern provinces was established in Agra. It was later moved from Agra to Allahabad in 1869. In the year 2016, Allahabad High Court celebrated 150 years of its establishment. 150 years. Okay. Now, just like how the court system was altered, Indian Penal Code was also established. See, previously we had something called the Law Commission, which was established in 1856, and Lord Macaulay was the Law Commission member. Based on Law Commission's reports and suggestions, final draft of the Indian Penal Code was created. Now, in 1861, the final draft of codes of civil and criminal procedures were completed. And prior to 1860, India was being ruled by the English criminal law to be the basis of presidency for the towns of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. And after that, Indian Penal Code came into existence. In fact, the beauty is Indian Penal Code after independence continued in Pakistan as Pakistan Penal Code, in Bangladesh as Bangladesh Penal Code. Eventually, this Macaulay's Penal Code or Indian Penal Code passed in 1862 remained an inspiration for many colonies, former colonies like Burma, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei. Numerous places adopted these. An interesting reform of Lord Canning was the income tax reforms. In fact, Canning period sees the entry of financial advisors into the Viceroy's Executive Council or Governor General's Council. The first financial member was James Wilson. He proposed many different types of taxes to improve revenues in India. But however, his successor was a guy called Lyne. lying only offered one tax called the income tax. About anybody who earns 500 rupees or more was liable to be made to pay income tax. Income tax of 5% was imposed on incomes of 500 or more in a year as a result of the income tax. In fact, first time we see proper income tax system. The government also substantially reduced its military and civilian expenditures, and to improve money, salt tax was increased. Now, see, remember by 1920, salt was at a tax rate of 83% in India. So salt was highly taxed commodity by the British. Canning's era also sees one important tenancy reform called the Bengal Rent Act. See, Bengal was notorious for its landlord-peasant relationships, and thanks to permanent settlement of Lord Cornwallis, the relations between landlords and peasants were very bad. Lord Cornwallis introduced permanent settlement in Bengal in 1873, and in fact, after that, Bengal Rent Act was the first tenancy regulation. The law was introduced by Lord Canning primarily to improve landlord-tenant relationship, because landlords, as part of the 1793 zamindari system, landlords had too much control over the farmers. Somebody had to restrict them. So basically, Canning introduced it. The main goal of Canning's Bengal regulations was to strengthen peasant position against the landlords by clearly clarifying the rights of the farmers and limiting landlords' ability to impose arbitrary rent increases and evictions. I mean, out of the blue rent evictions. Similarly, farmers who had stayed in a land for 20 years on the same rent were believed to given this right under the Bengal Tenancy Act 1859. It was a huge reform when it compares to the rights of the farmers, and that it was agreed that arbitrarily rents cannot be increased by the landlords without an inquiry. It also gave riots ability to rent their lands to further. I mean, subleasing the land system was also introduced here. Last but not the least reform of Canning was the tea mania. During 1860s, tea from Assam had started to reach Britain, I mean, gained traction in Europe, Assam tea. And Canning saw this as a great opportunity, and British government basically had a policy called the Wasteland Resettlement Policy between 1850 to 1860. So what Canning did is he started giving sort of restriction-free lands in Assam. In fact, people could buy lands in Assam for as low as 2 rupees 80 paisa to 5 rupees per acre without having to meet any clearance requirements, and with free simple rules which gave planters absolute right to buy lands for the cheapest price. This just led into an explosion of tea plantations. This resulted in complete frenetic expansion of tea plantations in Assam. That period historians have consistently called as the tea mania. So tea mania must be consistently associated with Lord Canning. The tea mania was marked by resale of tea gardens, as well as deception such as sale of lands with newly planted tea plants as productive tea estates. Even Britishers were doing this cross-selling, reselling lands, etc. All sorts of things happen. Even thanks to tea mania, Assam tea became the most popular export commodity of the British by 1869. Okay, so Canning has commonly been called Clemency Canning because look, Canning was actually coming to power at a very crucial time, and we've just finished 1857 revolt, and our Indian relations with the British were very sore. And instead of punishing the revolutionaries and the rebels, Canning tried to give as much mercy as he could at a time when national movement was sort of about to begin on its dawn. His liberal and tolerant policies actually instilled some faith in Indians among British. He also favored Indian traders who aided British during the revolt. And see, to be honest, as I said, other than anybody who was involved in specifically murder of the British citizens. No other punishments were installed on people of India. Canning ended doctrine of lapse, and he clearly said that British would not get involved into internal issues of Indian kings, and if there was an internal issue, he also Indian kings would British would involve, resolve the issue, and go back. So no annexation policy was coming from Lord Canning. He was also given the name Clemency Canning because of his gentle and tolerant attitude towards Indians. And Canning eventually departed India in March 1862. Couple of months later, he died, and Viceroy Elgin came as his successor. So, as a viceroy, Canning achieved everything that he was expected to. I mean, during his period, we see the Tea Mania, we see Indian Penal Code Act, we see Indian High Courts Act, we see Indian Civil Service Act, we see the Queen's Proclamation, everything. So, and Canning retired and left India in very poor health actually in March 1862. He had spent good amount of time. He was here from 1856. So, it's been long for him. And 1857 revolt itself had very hard impact on his life, and he was elevated to the rank of Earl, which is a higher rank in British noblemen, and recognized for his services in India. He died in June, England, 1862, and he is buried at Westminster's Abbey. So Canning, for the period he did everything that he could. So what is Canning's rule generally popular for? Number one, the proclamation. Number two, Civil Service Act, High Court Act, which establishes high courts, the Penal Code Act, Tea Mania, and clemency. From 1856 to 1862, he was in India, and he was viceroy only from 1858 to 1862. He was the viceroy. Okay. Now, that's it about Viceroy Canning, the first Viceroy of India. From me here today, my name is Ranganathan SVN Kondala, and you can follow me on Civils Plus IAS Academy. Also on my Telegram channel, which you can go to Telegram and search Plus Students, and you can join me there. I give all my notes, all daily current affairs. Every day I put articles of newspaper straight on the channel. Thank you guys. You have a nice day. I'll see you in the next video, and we'll continue the discussion of the remaining viceroys. Bye-bye.